Ary Rosenbaum here with another fun-filled episode of the 401k podcast. This week's topic, we're going to talk about 401k plan providers and their need to stop waiting for the phone to ring. Um, and of course, before we get that underway, go to that 401ksite.com, sign up for all of our events. April 16th, which is, by the time this episode drops, is literally around the corner. Um, with our special guest Ron Coomer, who played for the. I remember him for the Twins. He did play for the Cubs, but currently he is the Cubs radio analyst. Um, and of course, May 5th, which I believe is a Tuesday, we will be in Coors Field, Denver, Colorado. Special guest Ryan Spielberg, who will be the very first guest that we've repeated. That's the way things work, as well as our budget. Ryan was a great guest. Ryan is on the TV broadcast with the Rockies, and he was on the 2004 National League champion Colorado Rockies as they got swept by the Boston Red Sox. And of course, thanks to the people who buy my books on Kindle and paperback on Amazon.com. That 401k plan provider handbook, as well as Full Circle, available for purchase. Sold a couple copies the last couple of weeks, so I appreciate it. Every $3 from a book helps, I guess. But anyway, let's get to the topic at hand. A lot of times plan providers really, just wait for that phone to ring. When things break, plan sponsors call. And, the problem is it's a reactive service. And now I've always said that, the same way about plan sponsors. They're reactive. They are not proactive. And I think that plan providers just, respond to requests are really missing the opportunity to, add value to their relationship. And I think one of the biggest mistakes out there that a plan provider truly makes is assuming that a quiet client is a satisfied client. Plan sponsors are, busy running their businesses. Human resource departments are stretched in. Sometimes that, plan sponsor just doesn't have the time to call. So silence is not, acceptance. Silence is not that everything is running correctly. It doesn't really mean that the plan is running perfectly. And I think that plan providers have a tough time, managing their practice if they merely rely on their clients to identify problems. And that's the problem. Most plan sponsors are just not knowledgeable. They don't know what they don't know. And a plan provider, has the experience and does, and that's a problem. So, right then and there, I think that plan providers really need to understand that, silence is not a signal of success. It is a reminder to reach out here and there. And there needs to be, with your client, an annual checkup. There really has to be an annual operational review, see what's working, see what's not. It's, goes back to when I was at that Fakakta law firm. I came up with this, retirement plan tune-up, this plan review, see what's working, see what's not. Problem is, plan sponsors don't want to pay for it, even though, it was like $750 from Plan Assets, and I stopped promoting it because, I want to say in 16 years, I probably did 10 of them, because ultimately they don't. But I think it's important that providers reach out, because what fits for, it's like kids' clothing. What fits today don't fit tomorrow. And a retirement plan is a consistently, changing, um, it's a living, breathing, entity. And the parameters of a plan sponsor can change. They can grow, they can contract. There may be more opportunity for savings. It's important that to go beyond the testing and the Form 55 preparation. That's not that is not a real operational checkup. I think an effective plan review, in my opinion, is confirmation of eligibility procedures, making sure the compensation definitions are correct, review payroll processes, vesting records, and beneficiary designation forms. Because, like I said, last couple weeks, you don't want your plan to become a soap opera. And I think it's important that plan providers do reach out. It really, it's important it's like an annual physical, which I'm due for in about a month. Am I looking forward to that? Not really, but I think it's a must. See where I'm at. Get to ask the doctor some questions or whatever. It's important to confirm that deferrals are deposited timely and employer contributions are calculated correctly. Uh, the reviews don't have to be complicated. They don't have to be like a plan audit. What matters is that they happen. Providers who conduct regular checkups can catch problems early and demonstrate a level of professionalism that sponsors really, notice. Um, and preventing problems goes a long way. Then it's a much better opportunity than fixing them. It's the same thing. Again, I always compare it to like a retirement plan dentist. You fix these issues before, you get a good cleaning, you brush after every meal and all that stuff, and then you don't need root canals and fake teeth and all that kind of stuff, dentures or all that kind of stuff. And EPCR corrections are expensive, time consuming, and frustrating, but quite honestly, they are more cost effective than doing nothing and not fixing issues. Late deferral deposits, they're not done intentionally. They just so happen. Eligibility failures often arise from miscommunication between HR and payroll. Compensation errors often begin with misunderstood definitions. And by the time these problems, bubble to the surface, multiple plan years may be affected. Providers who maintain regular contact with, the plan sponsor clients certainly can identify warning signs early. A short conversation about payroll procedures may prevent a major correction a project later. Prevention is always easier than repair. Plan sponsors certainly need guidance. Many plan sponsors want to do the right thing but lack the technical knowledge to manage a retirement plan properly. They, plan sponsors really rely on plan providers for guidance. And, to this day and age, there are a lot of plan sponsors who don't understand the concept of being a plan fiduciary and the responsibilities that go with it. When I started in this business, well, to me, when I was at that Fakakta law firm, I think many plan sponsors didn't understand it. I want to say that over time, the litigation and the information that's out there, I think that most plan sponsors do. I understand their fiduciary responsibility, but there's still people out there who just don't. People who've been living in a cave or something for like the last 18 years or whatever it is. So, even if they do understand their fiduciary responsibility, they don't know when plan has to be restated or amended or that kind of stuff. They may not recognize when plan demographics have shifted. Where listen, maybe they need new comp, maybe they need safe harbor. And quite honestly, working on my own and working for TPAs, picked off clients merely because the plan provider just never reached out. I had one client where it was always a big failure on the ADP and ACP test, and the owner of the company was having to forego like 85-90% of their deferrals, and I got that client for many years because of that. And that's because the payroll provider TPA just didn't bother to reach out and say, hey, if you put this $7,000 QNIC, the owner of the company doesn't have to give up $11,000 of deferrals. Good providers out there create opportunities for discussion. Reaching out, sending out communications, it creates opportunity. It's a talking point. Every article I've ever written, it's always about talking points. It's always to create a conversation, and engage with people. I get, thanks to all the social media up there on the web, people call me directly to ask for questions, and I think that plan providers really can do a better job with that. There's so many tools out there that are cost effective in order to communicate the approach, and have a discussion that's can certainly maintain that client relationship. Again, I think if you're in a situation where they don't hear from you, the plan sponsors don't hear from you, they think you're dead or something, and a periodic call, communication, emails, all that kind of stuff. Um, you know, Suggesting any type of improvement, initiative by plan providers goes a long way. And being responsive is just not enough. I worked at TPA. The big deal was, oh, our rule is you got to, respond to the client within 24 hours. Um, you know, that's great as long as the answer is correct. Returning calls quickly and answering emails promptly is really important, but responsive alone doesn't really set a plan provider apart. I think it's you know, sometimes the best way to answer a question is then to follow up with a follow up question, and I think that plan providers really need to do that. It's not enough just to answer the client, but it's also ask, um, the plan sponsor how things are going. Um, I think communication, like the people skills. You always, like, when somebody asks you how you're doing, you don't just give an answer. You just give an answer and then ask them how they're doing. Um, you know, uh, which reminds me of what I said this past week. I think on Facebook and maybe Twitter, but I hate fake. I'm like kind of like Larry David. I kind of hate like the fake pleasantries, and there is no greater fake pleasantry than when you go to Costco and you walk by the phone providers, which it's not Costco, they're independents or whatever, and they try to engage you in hello and whatever, and there's always a sales pitch behind it. And I posted it, and somebody said, "Oh, I'll go to the opposite side of the store to avoid that." And I do all the time. I mean, I go right in front of them, and I just try to make sure that I don't hear them, because it's not sincere. They're not really interested in what I have, how my day is going. They're interested in selling me a phone, and that's just how I think about it. Um, but it's always important for plan providers out there to, you know, ask questions. How are things going? What's going on? Are things changing? Because then it starts maybe a conversation that, hey, maybe they do need new comp, maybe they need to do maybe they need safe harbor, whatever it is. Um, Initiative goes a long way, and I think that that's a competitive advantage. And you know, plan sponsors rarely fire plan providers just because of a single mistake. They change providers often because they feel ignored or neglected. And I think a provider who goes out, reaches out, regularly builds stronger relationships than one who waits passively for contact. Sponsors remember providers who check in and other suggestions. Initiative demonstrates commitment. It shows that the provider is invested in the success of the plan. When sponsors evaluate the providers, they often ask a simple question: does this provider make my life easier? Providers who take initiative usually earn a positive answer. That's how I see it. And technology doesn't replace service. Modern record keeping systems provide dashboards, automated notices, electronic workflows. These tools do really help the running of the plan, but they don't replace professional judgment. AI is such a great tool these days. Sometimes I think it's scary what's going on with it, and sometimes I wonder whether my job will be eliminated one day because of it. But technology doesn't replace a quality service. In the last 20, almost 28 years in this business, I've seen how much, um, technology has certainly improved and made things easier. One of the reasons I don't charge I've never raised the price of my plan documents is because technology has increased the time from drafting documents, it shrunk it by, I want to say, 75%. And, providers need to stop relying too heavily on automated processes, because by doing that, they may lose that personal connection that's so important for business. Proactive communication is really, still to this day, even with all the technology, it's essential, regardless of how sophisticated technology has become. And like I said, AI is just incredible. Small things matter. Proactive service does not require grand gestures. Sometimes it's the smallest things. I always say it's the smallest, gifts or whatever go a long way. A short email reminding a plan sponsor to, avoid the Dallas problem, Dallas soap opera problem of missing beneficiary designation forms, can certainly show an attention to detail, which I think is important. A brief call before, the end of the year contributions are calculated can prevent misunderstanding. A reminder about upcoming compliance deadlines reduces stress. These small efforts really show professionalism and care. Sponsors notice providers who stay engaged throughout the year. And it's important, to understand that the retirement plan marketplace, ever since fee disclosure, has been more and more competitive. Fees have been under tremendous pressure and will continue to do so. And plan sponsors certainly have choices, out there. Providers who differentiate themselves only on price risk becoming commodities, and commodity providers are easily replaced. One of the biggest misconceptions out there about fee disclosure was that it was going to create a race to the bottom, and it did not. It did not at all. Uh, you know, it it did not at all. So that's the problem, and it's the issue, and I really think that it's important to understand that price alone doesn't really do it. I think it's important to understand um, that service is just as important as price. I think sometimes it's more important than price. I think it actually is more important than price. And people don't go. I always said, years ago, I tried starting a cheap, cheaper like legal service when I was, trying it on part time. And what I realized is people don't want to hire a lawyer based on price. It's they don't hire a doctor based on price. Price is important, but it isn't the deciding factor. Service is obviously much more important. Sponsors certainly are going to shop for lower fees, but they hesitate to leave providers who actively support them. It's important to have professional pride, and it's important to help clients succeed. And to me, that will create professional pride. And the best plan providers are not the ones who solve the most problems. They are the ones who prevent the most problems. They stay in contact with sponsors. They review operations regularly. They anticipate issues before they become crises. They do not wait for the phone to ring because they understand by the time it rings, something has already gone wrong. In the long run, the providers who succeed will be the ones who recognize that real service begins before the client ever makes the call. So I think it's just important to always reach out and um, and just not let that phone just ringing. People. Again, it reminds me when I used to work for other people. Just because people you don't hear the complaints, just because of that doesn't mean that that they're happy. Silence is not acceptance. That's just the nature of things, the way I see it. They never, they never just, uh, you know, they just, you know, you know, I think it, when again, people are passive. They don't want to create a ruckus, so they're not going to complain. So, as an employee once, an unhappy employee, you just leave. And that's how I think that plan providers need to see plan sponsors, their clients, that if you're not happy, you're not going to call up to complain, and that, waiting for that phone to ring isn't going to help the plan providers out whatsoever. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this episode of that 401k podcast. Go to that 401ksite.com, go to Amazon, all that kind of stuff, and tune in next week for another fun-filled episode of that 401k podcast. Thanks. Bye.